Greetings, my dear brothers and sisters in Christ. Greetings from Javan Jyoti Ashram on this 21st Sunday of Ordinary Time. Welcome and thank you for joining me yet again in these Burning Bush Encounters series as we listen to the Lord speaking to us as Father, Son, and Spirit through the daily Mass readings and my interpretation of these readings. The title of my reflection this Sunday is Commitment is Not to be Feared. And the context in which I base my reflection is that of commitment. Commitment in belief and commitment in marriage. The theme based on the readings is even when we do not understand what God is asking of us, especially in the context of belief or marriage, faith and love, which are undeniably inseparable, enable us to see the joy as opposed to the fear of commitment. In the Gospel reading, John 6, 60-69, Jesus continues to speak with his disciples right after he made a startling revelation, which comes before this reading. Amen, amen, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will not have life within you. In response, Jesus hears his disciples murmuring, "This saying is hard. Who can accept it?" Jesus advises, "It is the Spirit that gives life, while the flesh is of no avail." As a practical consideration, as a clarification, this reading presents the end of Jesus' discourse on the bread of life. However, the flesh Jesus refers to here is not his flesh, but the flesh that is our human nature. The Spirit within us gives us life because this is our connection with God. This connection guides and sustains us if we allow the Spirit to control us as opposed to the flesh. Continuing with the Gospel reading, Jesus adds, "The words I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But there are some of you who do not believe." Here Jesus reveals that what he teaches us is life-giving, regardless of how difficult his words may appear. Some of Jesus' disciples felt that what Jesus was asking of them was irrational, so they feared to make a commitment to Jesus. Instead, they walked away. And I have a brief testimony here about when I first moved to Florida. And I knew no one here, I had no friends. I knew one person when I came to Florida. Besides my roommate, I knew one person. And he was actually a friend of a friend. So when I came here, I contacted him because he was the only person I know living in Florida. He's a very handsome guy, almost like a model. Anyone who's seen him will think he was a basketball player / model. Anyway, we became friends and he got closer and closer to me and I to him. And eventually we were dating. But at the same time, I was struggling with my relationship with God, going back and forth, knowing that there is a God and seeing him in my life, working miracles daily and still battling with trying to hold on to my old life. And that's when I did a baptism in the Spirit, a Life in the Spirit seminar, and I was baptized in the Spirit. And right after that, I did a retreat, almost like a mini Emmaus retreat. That retreat was a 3-day retreat. It was not residential. We didn't have to stay in, but we left every evening and would come back the next day. The Saturday night of that retreat, I received a phone call from him, even though he knew I was on retreat. And he said, "I want to see you tonight." And I said, "I can't because I'm on retreat." He said, "No, I have to see you. It's something that I have to tell you." So we agreed to meet. We met in a parking lot, public place, so we could actually converse in open space. And he told me, "I don't ever want to see you again." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I don't know who is this God that you are serving. But he came to me in a dream and he told me, if I don't leave you, he's going to punish me. I don't ever want to see you again. This is important for me because when I did the baptism in the Spirit, the Saturday, the Monday I had called the parish to ask for confession. And I met the priest there for a 2-hour confession where I went through my entire life and confessed it. And the priest told me, you have to change your life. Take everything out of your life that is not of God. And when I mentioned this person, the priest said, you have to take him out of your life. And I said, Father, I don't know anyone else in Florida. He says, it doesn't matter. You need to take him out of your life. He is the only person I had that I could call and I could depend on. He would take me to the supermarket. He would do the things for me that I couldn't do because I didn't have a car yet. And God was telling me, give him up. Didn't make sense to me, seemed irrational. But I had to rely on my faith in God, my love of God, me to believe that God had a better plan. And God used him, even though I was not strong enough to say no. God went straight to him and told him to leave me alone. As a practical application, as a caution to all, what appears easy in the flesh should set off an alarm that warns, do not go there. What appears challenging and irrational should grab our attention and make us ponder, what's in it for me? With Jesus, there's no catch. Jesus desires only the best for us. So whatever Jesus asks of us should be done with our total faith and trust. It should not be questioned, doubted, or avoided. Faith and love are the driving forces that enable us to commit to the will of God. And when I was able to say no to this person in my life, because he said no first, and I was able to walk away with faith, my whole life changed. I went from having that one friend in Florida to having so many that I was literally running away from people, avoiding them because I couldn't keep up with the amount of people that became my friends. The first reading, Joshua 24, 1-2, 15-17, and 18, shows that what Joshua is asking the Hebrew people appears on the surface to be simple and in no way challenging and irrational. So they easily agree with what he asked. Joshua is now the leader of the Hebrew people, as Moses passed on the leadership role to him before his death. Joshua has now led the Hebrew people into the promised land of Canaan. As a practical consideration, Joshua is inviting the Hebrew people to renew the Sinai covenant that they made with the Lord when they accepted to follow the 10 commandments. Now with Sechem, the covenant is renewed. By no coincidence, this is the same place where God had promised Abraham, their forefather, that this land would belong to his descendants. Joshua's words of wisdom, spoken in the spirit, not in the flesh, challenges. If it does not please you to serve the Lord, decide today whom you will serve. The gods your fathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose country you are now dwelling. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. To this, the Hebrew people responded, far be it from us to forsake the Lord for the service of other gods. For it was the Lord our God who brought us and our fathers up out of the land of Egypt, out of a state of slavery. However, what Joshua asked the Hebrew people was really problematic because their living circumstances made it almost impossible for them to keep their commitment. The Hebrew people's faith would be tested, which would lead them to act in the flesh not in the spirit. The Hebrew people who are actually entering Canaan are not those who left the slavery of Egypt. After 40 years, a new generation is now following Joshua into Canaan. Still, all that the Hebrew people know now was passed down to them by the previous generation. They know of the power of their miracle working God and have also experienced it firsthand. Joshua reminded them that God performed great miracles before their very eyes and protected them along the journey. And this is important for me because before I came to Florida, I had seen the Lord working mighty miracles for me wherever I went. Whether it was New York or Los Angeles or Barbados or London or Trinidad, God was working miracle after miracle for me. Yet still, when I came to Florida, which would become my promised land, in that this is where God will help me to flourish spiritually and to make a difference spiritually. This is where I was exposed to temptation again. And I fell right back into that temptation of lust, of being in relationships before marriage. So the temptation remained despite my efforts. But the baptism of the Spirit is what finally made it possible for me to have that strength to say no, only by God's grace. By inviting the Hebrew people to renew their covenant with God, Joshua was taking precaution against the inevitable, which is being exposed to temptations they had never faced before. He's inviting them to renew their covenant with God, so this commitment would safeguard their temptation to idolatry. While the Hebrew people had no fear in renewing the covenant, their faith in Yahweh, their God, did not endure once they started living in Canaan. This is because faith is needed to make a commitment out of love. And this faith and love must endure. The problem with the Hebrew people was that their faith in and love for Yahweh did not endure because they faced many trials in Canaan. Fighting off enemies, living among people more advanced than they were, living in scattered tribes, having no center for worshiping Yahweh. Through their long and agonizing process of settling down, they started to take God and God's power for granted. The Hebrew people started to depend more on judges and military deliverers and less on Yahweh. The majority of those living in the Canaanite cities lost their religion as they adopted the pagan religion of the Canaanites. For the most part, those living in nomadic groups held on to their belief in Yahweh. Disillusioned with their plight, the Hebrew people decided that it was best to unite as a nation under the rule of monarchy. This was an act of disobedience towards Yahweh, as it indicated that their commitment to Yahweh was wavering. The covenant renewed at Shechem seemed all but lost because the Hebrew people was allowing the flesh, not the spirit, to guide them. In the second reading, Ephesians 5:21 and 32, a different startling revelation is made, not by Jesus, but by St. Paul. Wives should be subordinate to their husbands as to the Lord. As the church is subordinate to Christ, so wives should be subordinate to their husbands in everything. This is a good opportunity to ask, what's in it for me? Because this is a teaching that challenges women, especially in the 21st century. As a practical application, while it is necessary to consider the historic patriarchal context in which such a teaching might have been normative, another way of understanding it is by looking at the benefit of such a teaching in contemporary times. The key statement appears to be, as to the Lord. Christians are called to be subordinate to the Lord. That is, we must die to ourselves out of love for God, loving God more than we love ourselves, and sacrificing ourselves to fulfill God's will. This does not reflect inferiority. Instead, it suggests trust in God, confidence, and empowerment. Consider this. If we interpret Paul's teaching in light of this insight, as wives being called to die to themselves for love of their husbands, could this mean being willing to do whatever it takes to make husbands happy? Is this a bad thing? Are wives loving husbands more than they love themselves a bad thing as well? Christians are also called to sacrificial love of the other in every aspect of life. So why not in marriage, where there's already a commitment to live as one for better or for worse? It therefore takes trust in God, confidence in oneself, and a sense of personal power to be subordinate to another. As a practical application, St. Paul also challenges husbands, saying, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and handed himself over for her to sanctify her." The key statement appears to be, as Christ loved the church. Christ loved the church unconditionally and sacrificed his life for her. This call to husbands appeared to be as challenging as that given to women because of the unconditional and sacrificial love they're being asked to give. And believe me, I'm not the one to speak about marriage because I have challenged God in my marriage from the beginning. As many of you may know, I think I've shared briefly on this before. God called us, my husband and I, to marriage. We did not choose each other. God chose us for each other. And that's another story, another testimony, it's another book. But because it was God's choice for us, I complained. I was difficult from the beginning. This is 20 years after, and I'm still difficult. I'm still complaining at times, asking God, why was it your choice, not mine? But recently, God has been speaking to me a lot about marriage and about the sacrifice that's needed. I looked at my life as one where I had to be subordinate to God's will for me, and therefore, in a way, subordinate to my husband. I had to accept him, and to me, that was subordination. The terrible thing about all of this is that my husband is a gift from God. God bless me with a husband who is doing exactly what Jesus is asking. Exactly how Jesus describes a husband. That is my husband. That's sacrificial, self-giving love, unconditional love. And even when I'm complaining, he's nice. Even when I'm not nice or kind to him, he's nicer and kinder to me. Even when I don't deserve it, he's sacrificing himself. Every decision I've made, even when it seems unjust, even when it seems irrational, even when it seems questionable, he always says, yes, you do what you want to do, because I know you pray. You do what God is asking you to do. He never questions. He never challenges. Not that he's a pushover, but because he loves as Christ loved his church. That's the way he loves me. And God has revealed that to me more and more, but especially within recent times, and has shown me that it's time to stop being stubborn. Stop being a questioning wife, wondering why, wondering how. Just accept, just love unconditionally. as He's loving me unconditionally, to love Him more than I love myself, to sacrifice to Him more, to be a better wife. And God is challenging me to that right now. And it's by no accident that I'm sharing this particular reflection now, because this is God's way of having me talk through what He's doing to me as an affirmation to myself. As a practical consideration, Pope Francis's apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, provides a description of the sacrament of marriage that highlights the need to look beyond what spouses think they're giving up or losing in marriage, to instead look at what they're gaining. He writes, the sacrament is a gift given for the sanctification and salvation of the spouses. That's number 72. Love of the other leads to the faith that no one spouse is losing himself or herself in a marriage commitment. Faith leads the spouses to love each other and to keep their commitment to marriage. Commitment brings a joy of what can be gained in marriage, the sanctification and salvation of each other, not a fear of what could be lost, freedom and independence. Consider this: commitment, whether in the context of marriage or belief, is not to be feared, because when we have faith in and love for God, we realize that our commitments made are really always commitments to God. And I leave you with this prayer. Dear Lord, I pray that I will never again look at commitment in a negative way, but as an opportunity to please you and to, in turn, be blessed. I just want to leave you with this short thought that God never asks the impossible, and He never wishes to harm us. Whatever He wills is the best for our lives. So let's make commitments to what God is asking of us right now. Whether we don't understand, whether it seems challenging, whether it seems irrational, remembering that God doesn't ask us to do the impossible, and He never wishes us harm. He only wants what's best for us. I pray that you'll be blessed in a special way this week. God bless you.